Hi, this is Sunil Bharti and welcome to TFI Newsroom. Today we have with us once again Matt Billman, CEO and co-founder of Netlify. Matt, it's good to have you back on the show.
Great to be back.
Tell me a bit about what are Netlify Edge handlers?
Netlify Edge Handlers is a new product we're taking into early release at the Jamstack conference, and it really allows, it really expands what you can do as a developer on our Edge network. So Netlify runs this globally distributed Edge network that's really tuned to the whole Jamstack architecture. It's very integrated into the way you both build and develop sites and have this end-to-end workflow around it, where you can just set up a Git repository, work with your framework of choice. Every time you push to Git, we pick it up and distribute the end result directly to Edge nodes all over the world. Now, when you're serving requests out of Netlify Edge, we've always had this set of declarative rules for redirects, proxying, rewrites, and so on, right? But sometimes people, especially larger enterprises that we talk to, or people running big e-commerce projects or things like that, have really specific things around things like authentication or personalization or banner injection or Edge includes or proxying to authenticated API endpoints or things like that you can't do just with a declarative set of rules. And Edge handlers essentially give web developers the full power of programming the whole request response cycle in JavaScript directly at the edge, running as part of our Edge software. So this becomes really powerful for writing code that does personalization, authorization, anything that you can do in a few milliseconds at the edge.
Thanks for explaining that. You have touched a lot of points about my next question. But if I ask you to make an elevator pitch about what are the benefits of these edge handlers for developers and DevOps teams?
Yeah, I think of course there's the use cases I talked about, right? Really common personalization, authentication. We had an example of a retailer that have outlets in many different locations and cities, right? And they want their front page, when you go in, if they have a retailer right in, very close to where you are, they want you to see that on their front page immediately, right? Rather than have to go navigate for it, right? So that's one of these perfect example where if you can write the code at the edge that determines where's the user, where's the closest retailer, is it close enough, then show this page instead of just the generic front page, right? So there's these use cases around it, right? But then there's the value proposition of how does Netlify do it, which is really tied to this idea of an end-to-end workflow, right? Where when we talk to big companies that are already doing these kind of things at the edge, then typically they have a team that are working with one of the big CDN providers or things like that's typically the networking team that's in charge of actually building and rolling out edge logic and so on. And then you have a completely different team that's the web development team that's responsible for building the pages and the site and everything, right? And as you start coupling, as you start pushing more functionality to the edge to get much faster response times and so on, right? You start having a tighter coupling between the edge rules and between what the web developers are building. But the teams that work on those two things are not necessarily very close together, right? Typically the networking team or the CDN Edge team or the DevOps teams and then the web development teams don't meet a lot and don't communicate a lot. So you start having a lot of problems with managing rollouts, with managing changes on both sides. We hear a lot of stories of things breaking in really painful ways just because one of the teams changed, maybe the web team changed an HTML tag that the edge handler depended on, or maybe a networking team made a change to the edge layer that the web developers depended on, right? So what's been central for us have been to give web developers the power to just work directly with both the front end, with serverless functions and edge handlers in one project, all in the same Git repository and all tied to the same workflow, where if you make a pull request in Git, doesn't matter if it's a pull request to your front end framework or to your edge handler or to your serverless function, you get a URL with everything pre-built on a production infrastructure where you can see exactly how that pull request would behave together, right? And when you roll it out and merge it into master, you know what's going live, and you get all the traditional benefits of Netlify in terms of like instant rollbacks if you need to, and so on and so on, right? And you also get the full local developer environment through Netlify Dev, where you can spin all of this up running locally on your machine as you're developing, and know that you have like sort of all these different layers of edge handlers, the actual like edge assets, serverless functions, and after the conference, even background functions, which is another like compute layer we are launching.
The fact is that solutions like these, there's nothing new, they're not unique. But what makes this solution kind of unique from the existing solutions, and what contributed to its availability now? Because you said you kind of rushed in to make it available now.
I mean, it's been in the works for a while for us, right? Like we saw the need for this from really talking both to customers and potential customers and people that are using other edge platforms and so on, right? And really, especially heard so many of these storage of very different teams working at the edge layer and at the web layer, right? So in terms of what really sets our solution apart, it is like traditionally what Netlify is known for is our developer experience, right? Like for really reducing the friction of how does it feel like to work with this architecture, right? And that's what we are also trying to bring to edge handlers, to really make it something that there's an end-to-end workflow around, where web developers can very easily work locally, test locally, open pull requests, and have this full like end-to-end cycle just taken care of by us, right? It's been important to make edge handlers use a common like a language that our developer base understands very well, in terms of like you can write them in JavaScript or TypeScript, and they run as part of the runtime called Dino, which is an open source project that the creator of Node.js launched a while back, and that we're building on top of, right? But that also means that it's a standard runtime that you can learn and reason about and use in other places as well, right? And then again, like our goal is really to make this a very good developer experience end to end. And in terms of rollout, right, like it's been a big lift on our team. We've essentially rebuilt our edge software from the ground up in Rust. It's been a long project, thousands of hours, to build sort of the next generation of Netlify Edge that allows us to offer these edge handlers, but also in general gives us a whole lot of benefits in terms of like how are we distributing edge rules, how are we distributing like the logic of what file to serve, how can we even improve like the performance and reliability of our system over time, and how can we iterate faster on our edge infrastructure.
Can you also talk about the impact it will have on adoption of Jamstack architecture, or how will it help those who are already working with Jamstack architecture?
Yeah, I mean, in general, right since we started with Netlify, right, like it wasn't like we came up with this Jamstack architecture and then went and told people they should use it, right? Like it was more like we started to see that this architecture was something that people were starting to build around and were starting to adopt, but there were things missing in the ecosystem that made it harder to build with it and harder to adopt, right? So that was like the key thesis initially for Netlify, when we saw that, okay, if we can, for a start, tie together like the CI/CD experience and the edge experience and make that extremely transparent, then there's a whole set of projects that gets much more viable for developers to actually build with the Jamstack. We saw like if we can introduce serverless functions as part of this paradigm, like now we can very easily write API endpoints, microservice endpoints, you can glue together different APIs and so on. And this will allow people to build much more, like many more projects with the Jamstack approach than they could before, right? And this is the same, right? Like we're seeing people already using different edge frameworks, like to overcome problems like how do we do personalization, how do we do A/B testing, if we have like large magazines with tons of articles, but we need to have a rotating set of personalized banners, whether it's for internal, like drive them to other popular articles at the moment, or it's advertising, right? Like how can we like have some logic that happens during the request response cycle that allows people to tailor just that part of saying like, okay, we have right now these banners in rotation and we have these pre-built articles that are already, how can we insert the banners in the right points directly at the edge, right? Like we saw all of these use cases that people had, right? Like that were very real and that were not impossible to solve for, but that again required them to then start gluing together different platforms, edge handlers from like edge logic from some of the big CDN providers that are often really like cumbersome and not super easy to work with, and then their web framework, and sometimes just like the level of complexity in getting those systems to really talk to each other and managing different sets and so on meant that people might go with a completely different approach architecturally and just say, okay, let's just go back to server-side rendering and build everything up front because like this is hard to work with, right? So edge handlers is really our way of saying, let's make it really easy to work with, right? And let's make it really straightforward to build with, to reason about, to operate. And then we'll unlock like a lot of new use cases for the Jamstack, not because you couldn't build them before, but just because they become much more viable to build and operate and reason about than they were before.
Matt, thank you so much for talking to me today about edge handlers. I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.